Dracula? Have you never heard the name before? I have, many times. With how iconic this figure is, it's unlikely you haven't come across at least one version of this famously fanged fiend. My introduction to him and vampires at large began with the 1931 Bela Lugosi film. For my 14th birthday, I received the VHS with this cover on it. This is one of my prized possessions, in fact. My Bela Lugosi doll. Who's a cute, awesome, evil, little minion of hell. You are. I'd always been interested in the strange and macabre, often renting these black and white universal horror books from the elementary school library so many times that the librarian in fact banned me from taking them out anymore. True story. Religiously, I watched things like Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark, Tales from the Dark Side, Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction, and even Ghost Hunters until I found out what a sham that was. But I gravitated towards vampires most of all, and Dracula being one of the staples in vampiric media that helped pave the way for the modern vampires that we see, I figured I'd take a look at the film that I absolutely treasure. Oh, hold on. A little thirsty. That's better. So what is it about this film that keeps me intrigued? It is decades old, so the quality isn't perfect, kind of like this video. The sound is decent, but softened in some respects, like this video. This is no, flashy effect type thing. It's partially a product of its time with its stylized performances you see in older films. But does this mean it's bad? Well, I'd be lying if I said that this film was for everyone. It's a slower-paced and quiet film that basically has you filling in the gaps with your own imagination, including any perceived fear, which, to be frank, it's a harder thing to scare a modern audience with this kind of film. I personally loved that we had to build up the threat in our own minds, but still, I'm a modern gal, and if you want to scare me, you've got to up the ante. It's scary in theory, but not necessarily scary in practice. I mentioned performances, and while I think that there are some stylized, I'm acting performances, I still feel that the actors did a decent enough job. By far, my favorite performances are Dwight Frye and Bela Lugosi as Renfield and Dracula, respectively. Frye's crazy and cowardly Renfield has one of the best payoffs in the film in an emotionally charged death scene that I feel still holds up.
What do you want me to do? Look, there's an opening. Speed up. Speed up. I didn't leave them here by accident. I didn't know. I swear. No. What? I'm loyal to you, Master. I'm your slave. I didn't betray you. Oh, no, don't. Don't kill me. Let me live, please. Punish me, torture me, but let me live. I can't die with all those lives on my conscience. All that blood on my hands.
Lugosi was subtle and charming, with only the trace of menace, suitable for an aristocratic vampire, and genuinely cared about this role, often wearing a costume and intoning into mirrors, "I am Dracula," to get into character.
I am Dracula. It's really good to see you. I don't know what happened to the driver and my luggage and, well, and with all this, I thought I was in the wrong place. I bid you welcome. Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.
One thing that this film has going for it is atmospheric build-up and subtlety. As I've mentioned before, a lot of the stuff takes place quietly. A lot of the violence happens quietly and subtly. One of the biggest dramatic scenes being Renfield's death. Most of this violence happens off-screen. We know it's going to happen, but we usually deal with the aftermath, kind of like our heroes, never first-handedly dealing with Dracula's evil, but always dealing with the aftermath, such as with Mina's bites and Renfield's madness. There's one scene in particular that's always kind of confused me. Renfield is left alone with this housemaid. She faints because he's crazy, and she gets frightened, I guess, because he's laughing maniacally at her. She faints, and we see him creeping, crawling towards her. It fades out, goes to a completely different scene, and this is never actually addressed. None of the characters bring it up. Whether or not this maid was eaten by Renfield, who had been up to that point eating insects, probably working up to humans. It's not shown what happens to this maid. It's implied that Renfield probably took a bite out of her, but we don't actually know. But as for something that actually has a concrete piece of, violence, I guess, an effect, is when Dracula, using his powers, we get a nice display of Dracula's powers throughout this entire film. He's telepathic, he can communicate telepathically, and he can manipulate people into doing things for him with his mind, especially his gaze. Those powerful, gazing, piercing eyes. He lures a woman selling flowers on the street into his arms. He drapes his cape over her. You hear her scream, it fades kind of outwards, and then we see dead body on the ground, and she is surrounded by police officers as Dracula walks off. That's kind of how they handled a lot of the violence, especially back then. You never saw it absolutely directly. In fact, Dracula's death scene happens off-screen. When Harker and Van Helsing go to rescue Mina in the castle, Harker goes off to find Mina. Van Helsing takes a stake in hand to go and kill Dracula. As we are with Harker and Mina, we hear the death of Dracula without actually seeing the death of Dracula. We hear the hammering of that stake into his chest, and we hear his death groans. But we don't actually see Van Helsing hammering it in. Some people this might piss off, especially nowadays. People want to see the monsters, people want to see everything. But for some of us, this was a nice, subtle, build-up type thing. It helps build it up, and you have to be more imaginative. Put yourself into the macabre atmosphere of the film. Overall, I think that this film is a wonderful historical piece. So if you like old films, if you like horror films, if you like somewhat dramatical pieces, things like that, this type of film would be perfect for you, and I highly recommend it. In any case, my children of the night, you have a happy Halloween. Terry over and out.